Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. All right, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. We are here in the studio with Ed, and I'm Lyndsay. And today we are joined with a very special guest, Bridget Stevens. So welcome, Bridget.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about a topic today relating to board members. People might not know, like, churches have a lot of people involved in decision-making processes, in leadership. You have a pastor, you have staff, you have board members, you have elders. And so we've invited you on because you have sat in a couple different seats, both being like just a member of the church, then to a board member, and now you have been moved over to staff. So I think you come with like a really interesting insight. We were talking in a staff meeting yesterday and you were just sharing thoughts that I was like, I never thought about that, which led to you being our next victim.
Yes.
I mean, guest.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess kind of just give listeners an idea of like who you are, like how long have you been coming to the church? How did you move into the board, staff? Like give people that trajectory of your time here.
Okay. So we moved to Midland in 2004, went to Messiah in that year. So 20 years. Wow. Started doing a lot in the back with the kids, what was kids ministry, Kids Creek now, with our kids. And as growing more with the church, I just love being there. About 3 or 4 years ago, was asked to join the board, which was kind of surprising to me.
People are always surprised, it seems.
Yeah, because
like me?
Right, because you don't know the background. But then I guess once you sat on it, you go, well, this is interesting to know that view. So that was kind of cool, because you think as a attender for 20 years, you kind of, well, I know this church. You don't. You know, there's a lot of things there. And then as far as the staff part, I would not have applied, but it found me, and I have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it immensely. So,
and you're doing what on staff?
Admin. And then as a floater to help whomever, and some media stuff with you, learning. That's like brand new. So forgive anything on Facebook posts as you see them. But other than that, no, it's been another interesting part of seeing, wow, it's a big building, but there's a lot that goes on in that big building.
Yeah. I've heard, because before coming here, I was like working in the corporate space and then just like attending church, volunteering in the church. And as I stepped into leadership, it's like the more that you are stepping into a new role of leadership, it seems like you're exposed to a lot more, where you're like, I had no idea. And you can see some like really difficult things. You are a part of some really difficult discussions. And I think that, I mean, kind of comparing that to just like being a kid, you know, like as a kid, you're sheltered to a lot of the decision your parents are making or things that they're having to really struggle with. And as you get older and older, you're brought into those things and you just become more aware. And so was that hard for you to make a move from being someone who attended and served to then stepping into like a board capacity?
Not as bad as I thought. Like, I was more concerned with, I'm going to make a wrong choice. But it was very well put to have your own opinion and to make sure you stated it, not to feel bad if you weren't on board with things that were being discussed. So that was a good thing. It was just you just have to have the courage to state it, you know? And there's some things that, you know, that views are always different on other sides. So there's not always an agreement. But there's some things that were hard to swallow, and you just go, wow. But if you love the church and you love what it's doing, you want to see it work through. So therefore, you would share what your opinion was. And then it's amazing to see the board start talking in the circles. I mean, one person making one comment can get the whole thing going.
Yeah.
But if everybody
it's like who's going to speak
right,
first.
if everybody is going, we'll just go with it. I think that's a big downfall.
Had you served on a board before?
Never.
Okay. And what were you doing working wise before being on staff here?
I was office manager for an appraisal office and for 16 years.
Okay.
A very small office. So again, you would think I'm not a people person because I'm not really around a lot of people, but I do like people.
Yes, I feel like you are one of the most people-iest persons. So you said a lot. I have a lot of questions, but I think maybe it would be helpful for Ed, maybe if you chime in, like, what is the purpose of a board? Can you share that, like, in the context of the different leadership stuff, like staff, board, elders?
Well, in our context, it really depends on every church. At Messiah, we have a board of directors that's really taking care of more policies. We're policy-based governance, and it just means that they write the policies, and then I run within. Like I can't sell the property, at where the church is, but buying other properties, I could do those kinds of things. So it just depends on what policies that the board writes. The board is over like liability, insurance, those kinds of things. And then our elders are really under it's the spiritual care of the church. So the boards really have different roles. And so I'm actually fascinated. So I love hearing what you're saying, Bridget, because, I only know it from my perspective. I don't really know it from a board person's perspective of what it's like to come onto a board and not speak your mind or just go along with it. Or that's fascinating to me. Yeah, I kind of want to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Just so that I can work better with the board, because I don't think a lot of times board members will share that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
with me.
What questions do you have? Because I'm sure, like, that is kind of insightful to hear that stuff. Like, is this the first time you're hearing something like that being said?
Yeah, in some ways I am. So that's why I'm kind of just... So what was it like for you when you stepped onto the board? Like, what were you anticipating and what did you see?
So I thought it would be mainly financial stuff, like you said. But there's a lot that you would bring to the table, asking for opinion or advice, not necessarily our votes of saying it was going to go or not go, but our advice. So that was different because I wouldn't have thought that. I thought it would be more overseeing the finance part, or what should we budget this, or this budget's falling through here.
Can you give an example of, like, the things that Ed would bring? Because I think some of that even might be shocking for people to understand, like, okay, what other decisions possibly could be
even
being
if there was a staffing thing that was changing, wanting new curriculum to go in a certain direction, the buying, for the bridge, the building aspects, having an idea of something further. What if we did this, kind of like with the Elevate stuff, bringing it further into our minds, because therefore then you go out and kind of touch base with other people, and we could bring back, people are a hit or miss, or wow, this is really cool. There is a lot that a lot of people want you to just stay in your building, and Ed wants out, outside, all the stuff. So you get the different people of, are we taking care of the inside? Are we taking... So it was a big difference. There was a lot more than just a financial aspect. It was very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Is that stuff that you would need to bring to the board, all of the things that Bridget is giving examples of, or is that something that you just really valued their opinion on, but you didn't need it?
I think from a policy-based, a lot of the decisions, I don't need to, but I really want to. I mean, I come back to the board and the elders a lot and just ask for their opinion on what should we do in this situation. And really, I think where the board has been so good is that they know that line, like I'll ask an opinion about something and I say, really want to hear from them. So we'll go right around the board and say, I'd like to hear from everybody. But then usually the board chairperson, right now it's Lori. Lori will be really good about saying, we're happy to give you our opinion, but according to policy-based, it's not our choice, it's your choice. And so they're really good about saying, you can completely disagree with our opinion and do what you think is right. But usually I just really want to know what everybody thinks, because that's going to help me to make a good choice.
And I think he does very well, taking it to heart, what everybody says. It's not just to make conversation. It's
I was going to ask that too. So
no, I think that he takes
how do I put you on the spot in front of your boss?
No, I think he takes it. I think he takes it to heart and really considers. I don't recall any of because there was quite a few times that he would bring something up where if we were really like, Ed, you shouldn't do that. He'd say, okay, but it's not off the plate. You know, like, okay, this time, but we're going to discuss it more. It was never, yeah.
Yeah. Well, here'd be two examples of just some challenging ones. I mean, when we started the auto garage 11 years ago, the board was split 50-50.
Was that a decision that you had to bring them in on before it was a go?
Well, it was a big decision. I mean, this is a huge ministry. So I
Yeah.
went to the board and I just said, what do you think? And when we had 4 yes and 4 no, and then it came down to the chairperson, and he said, I think I would like to consult the incoming chairperson. And so actually we went for lunch with the outgoing chairman and the incoming chairman, and that's where the decision was made. But that was really hard because, like, who do I listen to, the no's or the yeses on a decision? And so that was hard. That was a hard one. There's another one, like I remember it wasn't too long ago that, I went to the board and I just said, Elevate really needs a truck. And we're going to be, using more extensively the church trucks. And because we separated out Elevate, which is a different 501c3 from the church, and the board said, no, our recommendation is do not do it. And I had it all lined up. I mean, we actually ordered the truck. It was all ready to go. I mean, everything was ready.
That.
All I had to do was sign. And the board said, we don't think you ought to do it. And so I didn't.
Nope.
I didn't do it.
I think, again, like the reason I'm asking of like, are these decisions you have to bring to the board, or is this a leadership move? Because we're talking about how pastors and leaders can interact with their board and what things are necessary. And if that is not a decision where you're like, I could have still just got the truck without their permission. Could you have done that? Because the tool being like, but as a leader, it's really important that you bring your board along. Like what principle were you coming from in that?
I just value people's opinions. I really do. I really want to know what people think because I know they're going to be talking about it anyways. So I'd rather have them talk to me about it instead of talking amongst themselves about a decision.
Yeah.
So that was a decision. I think I'd have to go back and look and see, could I have made it? I think I could have made that decision as long as I had the plan and the plan to pay it back. And that was all in place. But when they had suggested that, I didn't do it. So there will come another day. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to be bringing it back to the board. And now that Bridget's off the board, hey.
The biggest naysayer of them all.
It might go. I was just starting to get well-spoken in there.
So that's, I guess, another question I had is like, why do you think it was such an environment where you felt it was difficult to share opinions that were contrary to maybe what was being suggested?
Well, I've shared with you that I don't feel that I have knowledge of a lot of things. So when you're put on the spot, you don't want to be the naysayer if that was the thing you should have done or shouldn't know. So I really think that it's important to ask questions.
Yeah. So it's difficult, I'm assuming, so you're saying like you were afraid to say the wrong thing is because you felt like you didn't know.
And it's not like you can get up and walk away. You can't say, well, I'll dismiss myself from this board meeting. You're there and you're now supporting Ed, but the church comes back to you. There was many conversations where Ed would tell us, okay, now you know that congregation's going to have questions. You had to be prepared to stand. So are you going to stand up for your church and what you just said you believed in and stand up for Ed? You couldn't just say your opinion. You had to have reason why. And it was well supported. Like I said, it would start conversation and sometimes it would change your mind. Sometimes, the conversations, that's what the whole board part to me was to make the conversation so everybody understood what was going on.
I think sometimes I make it hard for the board,
Yeah.
and I don't mean to do that. I do, and I don't think it's on purpose. But there's usually opportunities that come along that I get super excited about, and I just start moving forward, and usually come back to the board and say, okay, here's what I'm thinking, and here's all these things that I thought about this and this and this and this and this, and I think it puts them kind of almost at a defensive standpoint of, whoa, do we just say okay,
Yeah.
or really stop and say, stop the train. Let's unpack this. Let's really look at this.
I think one of the biggest struggles I recall while I was on the board was as we were doing more with the Gateway thing.
Gateway is like the healthcare
Yes.
clinic for if people are not aware.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
That it was more like, are we good inside first before starting another? You know, and we were trying to reopen journeys inside the church.
Yeah.
So again, it was, but are we, that was a lot of the people's questions.
Yeah.
Are we good inside before we try and step outside?
And I think that's a big question that a lot of churches
Sure is.
have is because, I mean, like you said at the time, like we had several ministries going. We had the Bridge Food Center. It was at its previous location at the time. We had Pivot Point. We have His Hands. We have Kids Creek Early Care and Education. They were renovating Journey's Coffee House to be reopened. And at the very same time, you're like, we're starting up this healthcare clinic, and none of us are healthcare professionals. And we're going to learn everything we can about it. And we're going to bring in the right people that we need to bring in who do have that knowledge. But that's like a really crazy concept. Like that, a lot of people were like, you guys are idiots. So it's like, what was your response in that part to like what Bridget is saying is like, are we good on the inside? Like, do you feel like the church was good on the inside?
I think, let me answer this way, and then we'll kind of talk about that. I think sometimes you have to look at opportunities, because when they come along, if you don't take advantage of the opportunity, sometimes that opportunity closes and the window closes. A Gateway would be perfect. I mean, we had the provider come to us and say, you know, I opened this clinic up not too long ago, and I don't like it. I don't like the running of it. I love the care part of it, but I really don't like the running of it. Would you like it? That's hard to say, sure, how about in 2 years? How about in 3 years? Because I think that opportunity would have passed. So I think you look at the opportunity, you look at everything else that's going on. I know there's sometimes board members are like one thing at a time. And I'm not a one thing at a time person. I mean, I thrive on, why don't we start 3 things or 4 things, and why don't we just juggle them all? So I know sometimes that can drive board members a little bit crazy. Like, why are we doing so many things at the same time? Can't we do one good thing? And then there's always the question of, is how are we doing internally? And if we're not doing internally, why in the world would we be thinking about something externally? But just the way that I'm wired is, why not do both?
I mean, I think people, their fear is running the church into the ground and then not being able to sustain the external thing.
I think that could be a concern. I don't think it's ever been my concern.
Has that been a concern for you?
I don't think necessarily into the ground, but getting it to where it would be scarce, or not, people not feeling that they were being cared for down the inside. I think that was brought up a few times. And it's just hard because you want them to see the whole aspect of it. And like, we did visits to each of the ministries. I think that helped the board somewhat to go, wow, look at this place. Look what they're doing. It's not just something that, so I think that if people are questioning it, and congregation does question it, that they need to then take it upon themselves to say, hey, let me go view what they're doing. Not just assume they're not taking care of us, because we are. And I think that they've done better. Matt coming along has done amazing with the inside stuff. So they're not being left in the dark, you know. They just sometimes aren't inquiring, or they're afraid. They don't want to know. Or they're afraid, well, what if it does fail? We start something different. You know, it's okay if it fails. We didn't do it the right way, we'll do it a different way. It's not putting it off the plate.
Yeah. And I think that's always like the hardest part. And we've talked about this on previous podcasts of, okay, when bordering that line of consumerism and missional, and I think there is some validity to ask the question of like, are we caring for those that we have? Because it's like, at the same time, if we have these community ministries and we're not doing them so that people come to our church, but we talk about bringing it back into the Beyond the Breakwater model. Like, when we have a boat that's out there and somebody is rescued from drowning and their lives are messy and they need counseling and they need care, and they need car fixes and they need food. They need all the practical stuff, but they also need care spiritually and emotionally. And so I think that question is valid in saying, like, if someone is rescued from Beyond the Breakwater and they do decide they want to come back to the harbor and fuel up themselves, like, are we prepared to receive people and care for them well? But again, that kind of becomes that line of consumerism of you don't want it to be the one and only thing. And then people become used to, like, we've been in the harbor, we were born in the harbor, we were raised our whole lives here, and like, feed me, entertain me, give me the best of, and now you're abandoning me to go out and find people that are drowning while I'm stuck here without your care. And so there is just that tension that people have to sit in, and it's a really fine line, and I don't know if there's an answer to it.
I think some too, though, that the congregation doesn't think that they need to take ownership too,
Yes.
and say, I want to be more involved. There's so many lacking in that part that you want to kind of turn it on them when they come back and say you don't have, and say, okay, we're willing to come alongside you and help you. Let's do this. But then they get scared to even want to bring that to the table. So I think some of it too is not just the board, not just the pastor, not just the staff, but it's the congregation taking ownership and saying, well, I guess I need to put a little bit in to get a little bit.
And you are someone that I feel like has a lot of, like, just this, like, get involved,
Get
serve.
involved.
You're like, if you have a kid,
I'll track you down.
yes. And like, if you have a kid and they're in kids ministry, you as a parent should be back there one Sunday a month serving. If you are in
there's so many kids, it wouldn't even be once a month. It would be once every 2 months. You know, there's so many back there.
Yeah, but and we had this conversation in staff yesterday too, of you were talking about your experience on the board and then coming on to staff and being like, oh, I'm now seeing some of the more, like, intricate things rather than being in a meeting that happens once a month, twice a month, once a month. It's like you are here 5-6 days a week. You're interacting with it. You're living, you're breathing it. And so by nature, you're going to see a lot more and experience a lot more where it may have helped you on the board understand it. But it's like, at the same time, the board doesn't have, they're all working full-time jobs in the corporate world, in their own space. So you can't expect them to be in the church 5 days a week. But you mentioned, like, you need to serve. Like, you can't just expect your engagement to be in the board meetings alone, but you do need to experience what the heartbeat of this church is. Yeah.
Well, how are they going to come along somebody or know their need if they are only on the board that once a month, or serve, or just coming to church on Sunday? You know, get your feet wet. Get in there. And I think it's really important, and I am pushing for the board and the elders to be hospitality. Say hello. You know, being on staff, I can't believe how many people I still don't know. You know, that's probably my only fear right now for when Jackie leaves is I don't know whose face belongs with what, you know. So I've really been trying to focus on names and faces, and because I always helped in the kids. So I knew parents and I knew kids, and that's so-and-so's mom, but I didn't know the people. But there's a lot that goes on that needs just small, like the Connect Sunday, you know. You need somebody to come alongside just once a month. And we struggle to find 2 people. And that shouldn't be, and it should never be the same 2 people ever, you know?
And
so it's just those kind of, put yourself out there.
And you're voicing that, like, you feel like you need to know names and faces, but that's not all on you. And that's where it's like, listeners can hear this and be like, start engaging your faith family. Like, this is not a cruise ship where we have people coming for entertainment, but it's a rescue ship where every single person has a job. So I want to switch gears really quick. So I guess the question being, when you have had board discussions and you have people that are hesitant and they, I don't know, naysayers maybe, it's like, how do you then decide what to do? It's like you had the garage and it was 50-50. How do you move the people that are the naysayers into maybe, like, being more on board with the mission? I know this is like a multi-part question a little bit, so take a stab at it where you will. But my thought just being, you have the naysayers. How do you decide to move forward but also aren't those naysayers part of that check and balance piece that the board is meant to play?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this, even in the question, because when I bring something to the board, what am I bringing? I mean, buying a truck or not buying a truck. Nobody's eternity is impacted by a truck. When we're talking about something that's more significant, like a healthcare clinic, opening up a grocery store, I mean, those kinds of things, those are really impactful. So I tend to come and say, here's everything that I know. What am I missing? And I think the hard part when I talk, if you want to say naysayer, it's somebody whose mind is already made up against it, but they don't necessarily have the information. So I want to make sure that they have the information to make a good decision. And sometimes they're just going to be against it. But then, why? Tell me why. What am I missing? And I think a lot of times I notice it's fear, fear of the unknown, fear of taking a step of faith. And I think that's sometimes really hard for boards, is to take a step of faith. Like, this makes no sense why we should be doing this, except maybe God's calling us to do it, and we should do it. And this would be maybe an example of sometimes it's hard sometimes, even working with a board, because we had an opportunity to open up a Journey's Coffee House actually in town, in Freeland, which is about 6 miles from where Messiah is. And Bridget, I don't know if you were on the board at this point.
On that one.
So actually they were expanding over at Pat's is where it was. And they came to us and said, we really want to give you guys the opportunity to open up a coffee house here. And so we looked at it and we knew we'd probably need about $100,000, to open it up. And so I went to the board and I just said, I'm kicking this idea around. We got the opportunity. Should we do it or not? What do y'all think? And we had kind of a litmus test for the board. If God gives us $100,000 of unexpected money, which we've gotten before, somebody might die and leave us a gift. So if God gave us $100,000, would we open up the coffee house? And so we prayed as a group that, God, if you would like us to start this, give us $100,000 of unexpected money. If you don't, then please don't give us any money, or don't give us the full amount. Then we'll know. And we had 2 board members who said, no, if God gave us $100,000, my answer would be no. And we were like, but why? And they said, because it's not a good business plan. It's not a good model. So even if God said do it, we would say no. And that was really hard for me, because what was behind that, they couldn't seem to see that if God wants you to do it, then he has to do the miracle. And they couldn't move beyond that. And so I prayed, but now my prayer was different. Like, Lord, I don't know what to do with these board members who are very much opposed to this. What happens if you give us $100,000? Am I going to have to just say, I'm sorry, I know you voted no, but God said yes, we're going to move forward. And I think it puts everybody in a really bad spot.
They needed to listen to our devotion yesterday. If God brings it, you got to come producing. You gotta.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. If God brings it, then you got to move. But he didn't bring it. And so, but I was trying to think, like, if I was sitting in God's chair and that's where the board was, why would I give it to him if they're going to say no anyways?
No, anyways.
So I kind of walked away and I just said, Lord, I don't think you're going to do it. And so I didn't know if that was a faith issue, a fear issue. I didn't know if it was somebody that, there are times that boards, I've noticed over the years, they just have to vote no to something. Like if I bring them, they have to vote no because they have to know that they can vote no. I just always pray that the thing that they vote no to isn't a huge thing that's going to be really like impactful in people's lives.
Have you ever brought something to the board that you were like 100% convinced that God was asking you and the church to be a part of, and the board said no?
There's been things over the years. I mean, nothing's coming automatically to mind. I mean, the journeys part, the truck part, it could have been the building, I mean, I went to the board and we wanted to buy $1 million building and we didn't have the money for it. And I had talked to the church and said, I'm not going to put the church in debt, but this seemed like it was a commercial loan. It was different than the church taking on a loan for themselves. And I remember a board member just being very vocal and said, you said you wouldn't put this church in debt, and I'm going to hold you accountable to what you said. And I was trying to explain, that's true. I'm not taking out $1 million loan so that we can renovate the church.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking out $1 million loan that the church doesn't have to pay back because the tenants that we have in the building are going to pay the loan back.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it was like, but you said you wouldn't put the church in debt. So no, the answer is no. And Lyndsay, those are hard.
So I'm wondering, like, because maybe you haven't had a hard no. It seems like from at least my time here, you may have had no's with a delayed yes. And so you have seasons of board meeting after board meeting of board meeting that talking about something, and it's like, no, no, no. And then somehow some things shift. And so if you have this dream that you are convinced that God has like invited us to be a part of, is your role as a pastor to now then just like continue giving vision until the board says yes? Or is it like, do you take that discernment and being like, okay, this board is in place for this reason, to be a sounding board, to be counsel, to maybe this isn't something God is calling us to? So what is your role in that?
Well, I think we're kind of in it right now, if you think about it. I mean, I went back to the board. I mean, I think you remember when I said, God put on my heart about $105 million of dreams. Mm. And I think that was like a shock to the board. And
you were in the board at that point?
I believe that was like towards the end of my meetings.
It was towards the end.
So
and you were like, thank goodness I'm getting
I probably did. I know Jim had come in from Gateway and had
he
said,
was
so
the
if you're
former
on,
chair
yes,
of the board.
And he's like, so if you're on staff, you're not on board. I said, nope, no, I'm out of there.
So
so
real
I think
quick, what was your thought to hearing that?
I'm always curious. So my curiosity is usually I got to hear it out. I have to hear all of it and envision it the same. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think if on any of the ones for even like purchasing where the bridge is now, I think that I was hesitant, but the excitement in you there's just an excitement, and you're thinking, like Ed says, if God's going to provide it, why shouldn't we try it? You know? Mm-hmm. And it earlier, it probably would have floored me hearing him say that number.
In a bad way or a good
right,
way?
like, what are you talking about? We can't even make the electricity, type thing. But when you've seen that the bridge, what happened with the bridge, and when you've lived part of what's going on with Gateway, you go, it's possible. Listen to it. It's a number. Mm-hmm. It's a large number, but it's just a number.
Mm-hmm. So without disclosing any names or specific details, like what was the general read on the board from hearing that dream?
Let's work on the inside.
Oh.
We're not quite ready. Finish something. Could we finish something first? Because I think the bridge wasn't quite moved in. Uh-huh. So it was like, can we close out something? It wasn't not a chance. It was just, could we finish something? I know that, like, when I first started the board, it was, this is going to be really simple, and you're just on meetings. I think we had 4 extra meetings, and one that went till like 10 p.m. And I'm thinking, where was this easy or extra? Mm-hmm. So it was a lot to dive into. So I think the 2 or 3 years I was on there was a lot of changing going on. And I think as you sit there and you get more and more, you do sometimes just go, can we just step back? Can we just breathe for a minute before something more is brought on? It's not necessarily, no, we're not supporting this 100%. It's more like,
let's
we
just
need
wrap
to
our arms around this a little bit. Like, we're not opposed, but let me just get my bearings for 1 second.
Exactly.
That's like,
just see.
Beyond the Breakwater, it's like I was super sick and throwing up, and we were out in South Haven, and I'm like, I just wanted to be on like still ground for just 1 second. We can go back out, but can I just like be on like stable ground for a second?
Yeah. And we didn't.
We didn't. No, I just leaned over the side and fed the fish. So, okay, we're in this now. Yeah. So Bridget is saying, like, her read on the board was, let's work on the inside. Mm-hmm. We're not opposed to it, but let's move forward wisely. Was that your read on their response?
I know there was always a concern of inside and outside. I mean, if we go back to that, My role is to make sure that it's happening. So do we have the staff? Do we have the resources to make sure that it happens? And I think there's one other layer for the inside. Sometimes the church can get to the point of saying, do it for us instead of us doing it. So when you talked about taking ownership, you are so right, Bridget. And I think as a whole, and I don't think most church people realize this, they're responsible for their own spiritual life. That is not something that you can delegate to somebody else. I mean, every parent is responsible to raise up their kids to know Christ. That's not the church's responsibility. It's not my responsibility to sit down with you every day and have you open up the Bible because you're not willing to do it for yourself. So I think I see the church a little bit more supplementary, that if every person is opening up their Bible and they're growing as a believer in Christ, now come to church, hey, can you help us go deeper in this? Can you help us learn more about it? I think it's the church's responsibility to care for each other. That's very biblical for us to care for one another, bear one another's burdens. The Bible doesn't say, just call on the pastor to do it all for you. Anybody can go to the hospital and care for somebody in the hospital. But when the church goes, well, that's nice that everybody came, but how come Ed didn't come? That to me is when well, wait a minute, I'm happy to go, but why am I the only one that matters if I go or not go? So I think we keep working on, when we talk about the inside, are we equipping the church to care for itself, not be reliant on one person, meaning the pastor or pastors. So I know that's really important to me. So sometimes there's a little bit of a conflict there of, well, we want you to be in your office just in case we want to come to your office. No, make an appointment if you want to meet with me. And that's not what people oftentimes want to hear. So my role is to make sure that needs are being met, not necessarily that I'm the one that making sure that it's all, or that I'm doing it.
Right. You come alongside them.
Come alongside.
Yeah. You work with them instead of, like you said, why would you're enabling them if you're doing it for them? They're not learning a thing.
See, and I think enabling is all harbor. I think that whole harbor ministry is we're allowing the church to do nothing and watch one person do the ministry. And I think that's really harbor talk. But when you're talking about going beyond the breakwater, it's just like, come with me and learn. And everybody's got a role and everybody has a part to play in this big picture.
Yeah. And not like, come with me and watch, but like, come with me. I have a job for you to do because I need help.
Yeah. Well, actually, while we're doing the podcast, we've got people that are at the Bridge Food Center right now. They're working or they're volunteering there. And people are at the auto garage and they're working. And so, yeah, I think that's my role, is to make sure that the church does it have what it needs internally? But there's always, we've talked about this, there's a gravitational pull to always want to be cared for. And I think we're always having to push. And I think my role is to keep pushing outward, always pushing outward.
Yeah, which feels very tense at times because it's just contrary to our nature.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Well, think about, just from a logistical standpoint of going beyond the breakwater with the boat. If you do nothing, you get pushed into the harbor. But it takes energy and it takes effort for a boat to actually move out. And I think churches don't realize if we do nothing, we'll wind up in the harbor. If we do something, we won't even make it to the breakwater. But if we actually put a lot of energy and effort, intentionality into this, maybe we can get to the breakwater, but then it's even more energy to go beyond.
Yeah. And I think that is kind of one of my last questions here is, and something that we've had listeners asking us, one specific listener I'm thinking of is he's been trying to bring this idea of going beyond the breakwater, or in practical terms, just having the church serve their community, bringing this back to the church over and over again over the last year. And it's we get an email from him once a week just saying okay, we had this conversation and it didn't go well, or we had this conversation and maybe one person was interested, and we had another conversation and the board won't do it, or the leaders won't do it. And how do you encourage lay leaders, board members to have a missional mindset?
Yeah, I think we should take this on a little bit more in a whole episode. I think it'd be really good to talk about those things.
Okay.
Because I think it matters if the pastor is driving the bus or if he's not, and the board is trying to. And so I think we have to talk some leadership principles of who's doing it.
Okay. Well,
And
maybe we
who's
pick that up
not
next
doing
week
it.
then.
Yeah, I think we really should pick it up. I think it'd be a really good conversation
Okay.
to go.
Yeah. Well, before listeners go, what can we give them to do before they go?
Well, I'd love to hear from Bridget, but let me throw
Put you
something
right on the
out.
spot.
Right on the
Well,
spot.
maybe you can just respond to this because I think this would be really good. I think the board is critical in my role. It's critical because the board is the one who is either going to encourage me to be courageous and go beyond the breakwater, or they're going to be discouraging me from going beyond the breakwater and saying that I really need to spend more time internally. And I think the board has a lot based upon what they're encouraging and what they're not encouraging. And even looking at, and it really will kind of be a question here, Bridget, but I've noticed if a church focuses heavily on the internal, they never go beyond the breakwater. But I've also noticed that when a church focuses heavily on beyond the breakwater, it strengthens internal. Internal's always, because all of a sudden new people are starting to come and fruit of the ministry is starting to happen, and that encourages and excites the church internally to do even more. But when you focus only on the internal with no external, I've watched it almost just descends, almost like somebody's letting the air out of the balloon because there's no excitement that's happening for something beyond that. But maybe just comment on this, Bridget, for how do you see the board's role for encouraging, discouraging, courage from the pastor role on the board?
I do agree that if you're discouraged, it's going to shut things down. And if they're discouraging you, they're also discouraging others, because we talk amongst ourselves, but also friends and congregation, again, asking questions. So if they're already at that discouraged level, that's just bringing more of a team discouraging the said pastor, in my opinion. If they're on a encouraging level, obviously it's a better outcome all over. As far as the internal, I think that there's been such a good increase, as you say, in our internal church with what's going on. And I think that you as the head pastor has taken that on to make sure it's taken care of, which then I think puts more people at ease to agree with more things. In my opinion, it's sad if you're discouraging somebody, that's fine. But if you're discouraging others due to your opinion, that's not fine. It's okay to have your opinion of it, but if you're going out relating how you feel, what you think, in a more deeper passion, then you shouldn't be on. You shouldn't be. I can't say on the board, but you shouldn't be a main focus in that church. For trying to build it up, because the whole point is building people up, impacting others, as you say. So if you have a discouraging outlook on a lot of that, you wouldn't be a good candidate.
Well said. From my perspective,
Well, that's
very
good.
well said.
And I'm having a lot of thoughts and questions, which we will save for next week. So thank you, Bridget, for
You're
being on
welcome.
today. And it was a great conversation. And we will catch everybody next week. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.